As municipalities and metros await the finalization of coalition governments that are set to govern the regions after the ANC failed to maintain their majority rule, the governing party this past weekend held a post-election National Executive Committee meeting. And the removal of President Jacob Zuma, it seems, is now firmly off the agenda. And the party has since come out to take collective responsibility for the decline in support following local government elections. And they've decided to reprioritize the national budget in favor of no-fee increases at universities. Analysts Aubrey Matshiqi and Dumisani Hlophe are with me on the program to discuss the NEC meeting and the party's plans of readiness as they negotiate coalitions with other smaller parties. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome.
Good evening, thank you.
Right. Who would have thought that local government elections will continue to dominate the news for this long? You know, in the past, it was a smaller Nyana type election compared to the national election, which was seen as where the big game is being played. Now, local government elections have become the big game. Aubrey?
Well, actually, we should have known that they would become the big game, given the fact that in 2011, we had a very exciting local government election, and the voter turnout as a result went up by 10%. And it was more or less the same this time at around 58%. So the fact that the opposition, particularly the DA, was able to make sure that its supporters turn up is a function of the fact that they've succeeded in exciting the popular imagination of their supporters.
A lot of money, a lot of color, a lot of excitement during the campaign period. Fair enough, but counting took a bit longer. And ultimately, the outcome seems to have surprised other people who did not anticipate this. Dumisani, you know, you're a commentator yourself. You've seen the commentary from other people.
I'm not sure if it was extremely surprising. The outcome. I think it was to be expected. I mean, the close call in the other local government election, with Joburg in particular, I think it gave a sense of that this election was going to be very, very tight. My own unscientific prediction was that the ANC was going to win by a slight margin, and that subsequently there will be a need to build a coalition, exactly as it is happening now. But I think something which is more fundamental about this election is that it affirmed South Africans as conscious voters, and that they are conscious about the liberation struggle, the need for freedom and all of that, but they are very rational voters. They can, if you are not performing, they will kick you out.
Well, but, you know, in the lead up to the voting day with that fill up the stadium kind campaign and parties competing on that.
It's called the stadiology.
If you were to go only by that, you'd have thought that ANC is going to clean the floor with all these other parties.
Tim, I wrote a column before this election about the 1961 election. During that election campaign, the meetings of the progressives were full to the rafters. They did not even have space for their speakers. Now, the person who told me the story, Peter Soul, says to me, Aubrey, we were trounced. And the lesson from the 1961 election is that you can win the meetings and lose the election.
It was more of I saw the feeling of the stadium to be more of a show of political force, rather than translating into votes. And by the way, Aubrey, in 1994, the election in 1994, the National Party then went to Limpopo and they had very, very serious big meetings and they distributed T-shirts and they slaughtered cattle. And lots of people came and they ate and then they voted ANC. so this stadiology, that's what Dr. Selma Dr. Figeni calls it. This stadiology does not lead into...
does not translate into support or votes. Yeah. But now, everything, I mean, the dust has sort of settled, but in terms of the formation of coalitions, that is still up in the air. Let's look at the ANC itself. Introspection, those were the words that we had going into the NEC over the weekend, and that there's going to be serious reflection again. Yeah. Now, speculation was that serious matters are going to be tackled, and the outcome is going to be a very interesting one.
There are two issues there, Bratim. The ANC I'm beginning to distinguish between the ANC and the ANC leadership. And I think the ANC leadership does not have a political will to do what they themselves call self-correction. I don't think there's too much unity within the top six to make very, very drastic, decisions. So moving forward, the ANC will not self-correct. It will continue to be business as usual. What they are likely to do is to regroup for electioneering purposes, but not necessarily substantively become the major force. And quite sadly, we associated the loss of the ANC with numbers, the votes and all of that. What the ANC actually lost is it's a historical legacy. It's the liberation character. It's being a champion and a leader of society. These days, when you talk about the ANC, you cannot associate those issues with the ANC because what the masses have decided, it says that we no longer recognize you as a liberation agency or as a force in that regard. Now, self-correction, it means they must recapture, that character, which I think, given the press conference, that they held after the ANC meeting, it's just business as usual. I don't think they have a political will to do that. So,
but let me bring in Aubrey here. But were people expecting too much from the ANC, or maybe it means something else when they talk about self-correction? I'm not sure. There were some dramatic things that were being expected, that maybe the president will be reprimanded, recalled, or whatever. But the Secretary General, Gwede Mantashe, says those issues were not even on the agenda. What do you think was on the agenda that gives a sense that there was some interest in self-correcting, whatever that means?
Well, objectively, there was never a chance that the ANC would deliver something better than the damn squeak of a statement they delivered on Sunday. Because first of all, President Jacob Zuma enjoys substantial support within the NEC of the ANC. And secondly, there is a tension that is irreconcilable in the ANC. On the one side, you have the interests of President Jacob Zuma and his survival instinct. On the other, you have the imperative for the ANC for renewal and regeneration. The two are not reconcilable. And that's going to remain the case for some time to come, which leads us to another conundrum the ANC is facing. The president may have an approval rating inside the ANC that is higher than the approval rating outside. In my view, it's no longer interesting to talk about why the ANC is soft on Zuma, because what matters is the fact that the approval rating for the president outside the ANC is the one that's going to matter in 2019.
Now, in terms of the shocks that I think those in leadership must have felt, irrespective of what we say here, right? Irrespective. And interestingly, it is revealed that there's a document, a report that was presented, and the report is more than a year old. It did indicate that the ANC is going to suffer losses in these local government elections. I don't know of what value it would have been at this NEC, but be that as it may, how did it deal with the shock, of these elections? Losing Joburg and Tshwane should count for something, Dumisani.
Look, extremely so. And the trends have always been there. If you look since they took over in Polokwane, people left to form COPE, people left to form EFF, NUMSA left to form the United Front. There's a whole lot of independence that has sprung out throughout these municipalities. And now they have lost the metro. So the signs have been there, written in bold. But part of me says the ANC is behaving like a group, not a team. A group, people are in it as individuals for themselves. But in a team, they operate for the greater good. Now, unless they begin to engage on those internal dynamics, they will continue to suffer. So I don't think they've dealt with the shock in any way. If given the statement yesterday is a reflection of the meeting, then they haven't done anything to that regard. The sad part, Pratim, is that moving forward, the ANC is just going to be another party. contesting for election without that historical, character that we have known it for.
Aubrey Matshiqi Dumisani Hlophe, we will continue the conversation in a moment as we speak. There is talk of the coalitions, and we will be looking at the possible coalition formation, who's going to partner with who, where, and how, and this will happen in a moment. Several metros in the country are still waiting for formation of governments because we've reached now the era of coalitions. Nelson Mandela Bay, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane, Joburg, they are without governments. Well, at least by the 20th, we should have a sense of who is going to be in charge of what, where. And the economic freedom fighters seem to be the main kingmakers here. They are going to be the major influencers of how governments are formed in these metros. Mr. Aubrey Matshiqi, let's go back to the ANC's NEC. Do you think that those who will be negotiating on behalf of the ANC have been given clear direction of who to talk to and where the compromises should be made?
Well, on the first question of who they should talk to, they have clear direction. They should talk to everyone because the ANC is in a state of desperation. So they can't afford to be choosy at the moment. But when it comes to the content of the mandate, it will depend on the mandates of those they're talking to. For instance, in the case of the EFF, it will depend on the demands the EFF will make. In my own view, the EFF does not want and cannot afford to go into a coalition with the ANC. And therefore, the EFF is going to make demands the ANC cannot meet.
And Dumisani Hlophe, how do you read this? I mean, is the EFF being a bit coy when they, held back and waited until the ANC held its own NEC and they are having their own meeting now before issuing a statement? Are they being coy, knowing fully well that they may not form a coalition with the ANC? Because everybody in the nation is speculating. There is a chance they could form a coalition in ANC in one metro and with the DA in another metro, and so it goes.
It could be if the EFF goes into a coalition with the ANC, it will be a rescue mission for the ANC. So I don't see them doing that. There's someone who said, I was saying to someone that they beat them in Parliament and now they want them in a coalition. And someone says to me, that's why you should never insult a crocodile before you cross the river. That's just possibly what's happening now. Look, I think it's okay for them to be pompous. I think it's their moment.
Yeah.
Although they've got 10%. I think what I found a bit disingenuous about the EFF is that they put ideological demands, for example, like the land issue and all of that as part of the requirements on the negotiations. But then for them to get to that level, they must win an election substantial. So if you have 10%, it means the electorate did not actually endorse you overwhelmingly on your ideological stance. And at a community level, people are looking at three things. A municipal government that is responsive and timeous, one that performs in terms of local economic development, and the third one is good governance. So if you are very smart, as the EFF should be, these are the issues that they should be negotiating on, and not the bigger issues. But then I think maybe Aubrey is correct to say that they will make these demands knowing very well that the ANC will not.
Well, the coalitions are still to be formed. Let's speculate, gentlemen. Starting with Nelson Mandela Bay, do you foresee problems there?
Well, at first I thought it was a foregone conclusion that the DA would be at the center of a coalition government in Nelson Mandela Bay. Now you hear Denny Jordan making noises about pulling out a rabbit out of their hat. It remains to be seen what the exact configuration of that rabbit will be.
But now coming back to Gauteng, it's a bit complex yet simple. The ANC leads in Ekurhuleni, can get one or two parties to support and then they can form government there. The ANC leads in Joburg, not outright majority obviously, but they need much more support in order to form government. The DA leads in Tshwane. The they need support from elsewhere. In Joburg and Tshwane, it seems the one party that you need to talk to, whether you're ANC or DA, is EFF. How is it likely to be formed?
Well, I've just heard yesterday that the EFF is negotiating for the entire province, not necessarily in isolated pockets. So they are negotiating with the DA for Mogale City, Joburg, and Tshwane. So it's highly possible that they might, my suspicion is that that's the likely coalition.
So they want to change it into a sort of DAFF kind of setup here. Is that the talk that you hear?
Yeah.
Okay, and how strong, what is the possibility of that, you think?
I think the possibility is fairly strong. I think the EFF would have a serious difficulty getting into a coalition with the ANC.
Why?
Because they have declared this war on the ANC. And you see it in Parliament, you see it everywhere. I mean, interestingly, even at that moment when the four ladies, at the IEC, they made it, now at that moment, after that, you had the Women's League president, Batabile Dlamini, who actually went on a very, very, serious drive against the EFF. Now you don't do that whilst negotiations are going on. And the fact that they don't recognize, by the way, President Zuma as the president since the Constitutional Court judgment, it will also make a very strong mockery. In fact, I think the EFF did a very snap survey on his Twitter asking his own people about who should they form coalition with. And the bulk of those people actually rejected a coalition with the ANC. So it will be a serious contradiction if they were to go into a coalition.
Let's look at the dynamic then of between the EFF and the DA. If we can spend a few moments discussing that. Can they form a government? Can they work together?
Well, they have to, because the election result has given them no other choice. Choosing between the DA and the ANC for the EFF is the greater of the two evils. Because if you look at the ANC and EFF dynamic, we can talk in terms of the tension there, or the conflict there, being quite tense, because the conflict is quite intimate between the EFF and the ANC. If you look at the dynamic between the EFF and the DA, well, there's nothing common between the two. The DA does not represent the kind of society the EFF wants to build. But given the choice between the two, the lesser evil will be the DA.
In any event, Bratim, in politics you can explain any decision you make.
Yeah, but also, you're right. But also remember, politics is the art of two things. It is the art of the possible and the art of faking sincerity.
But just quick comment from you, Dumisani, a very brief one. If EFF's approach, and we'll hear from them tomorrow, is that they want a blanket approach to Gauteng specifically with the DA, then it changes the way things work here because the provincial government is ANC.
Yes, definitely. It does. And I'm just thinking of Paul Mashatile as an MSc for local government, sitting with DA, mayors. It's going to be a serious difficult. But, even beyond that, keep in mind that the senior bureaucracy in these local municipalities and metros are actually drawn from the ANC. So we're going to see a very, very serious turbulence in the next 10 years, in the next year or so.
Yeah.
In fact, I dare to guess that, one of the mayors may not even finish a 5-year period.
Okay, and of course, all these parties have an eye on the 2019 elections, for that matter. I doubt that they'll be having a 5-year plan, the way I see it. And the ANC itself has got to deal with its own issues, 2017, then you have 2019, then you have the coalitions, then you have so many things. We live in interesting times. Thanks very much, Aubrey Matshiqi and Dumisani Hlophe.
Thank you.
Well, you decided this. Don't be baffled. You are the one, as the voter, who decided that the outcome should be like this. And my analysts here, commentators, helping us make sense of the most likely outcome. And of course, the parties will pronounce on how they want to form government. And we would like to hear from you via email. Write to us tonight with timmodise@gmail.com. We would like to hear your comments as well on Twitter @timmodise.